Hello, and welcome to the newest episode of the New Year Six podcast. Today, I will be wrapping up my conference previews for the Power Five. Landing tonight on the SEC. Definitely going to be a power-packed conference again. Like it is every single year. From a format perspective, it's going to look just like every other conference video I've done so far. So just going from the top of the bottom of the conference all the way up to the top and picking out a player on both offense and defense that I think is going to have a breakout year. So with that, let's get started. SEC is still in divisions, at least through this year. Next year, it's that free-for-all, anyone's game. But for right now, we have an SEC East and an SEC West. And I'm going to start things off tonight in the SEC East. So kicking us off there, a team that probably has a lot of upside when we really think about it. Shocked a few teams last year. Put up a good fight. Better fight than I think most teams anticipated them doing. And that would be Vanderbilt for 7th place. That would be my prediction for them. Again, I think Clark Lee is doing a fantastic job out there. It's an incredibly difficult job to win at Vanderbilt. There's no real fan base there. There's no real admin support for the team. So it's not as easy as to win at Vanderbilt compared to Georgia or Alabama or LSU. Vandy's at a pretty distinct disadvantage there, and Clark Lee almost made a bowl game last year, ended up 5-7. I know they want to take that jump. I don't see it happening this year, maybe in the future, but not in 2023. Looking at the offense first, I think the receiver room is actually pretty decent. Really, Will Shepherd, leading the way as your pretty dynamic number one receiver on this team. I think AJ Swan is bottom middle tier QB in this conference. I do think he's someone that can lead Vanderbilt over the course of the season, and he's one of the younger QBs in the conference. So I think he's an exciting prospect, and really looking forward to seeing him play this year. With that in mind, I think your breakout player is going to be a true freshman. I know there's been some transfers out of Vanderbilt over the course of this offseason. And with that, it looks like they're going to have a true freshman running back this year. So with that, guy coming straight out of high school and starting for Vanderbilt is going to be huge. And that player is going to be Cedric Alexander. So 3-star recruit in the class of 23 and, presumed to be the starter at Vanderbilt this year. Huge opportunity. What Vanderbilt did very effectively last year was run the ball. So it's an offense that needs a good running back. It's a pro spread, so running back is incredibly valuable to the success of Vanderbilt's offense. So if this kid comes in and is a day one starter, not only is it's going to take some time for him to get up to speed, but the reality is that he'll be there for a few years and can be a feature back in Nashville for years to come. So I'm looking at Cedric Alexander to break out this year, claim that starting role, and then from there evolve into a reliable running back in the SEC. Looking at the defense, this is where I have a few more questions compared to the offense there. I do like the DB room. I think there's a lot of talent back there. I think CJ Taylor. I know he kind of plays like that hybrid. Every program has a different name for a nickel star. In Vanderbilt, they call it anchor appropriately. But you put him back there with DeRicky Wright, Jalen Mahoney. So a good safety presence, nickel back presence. So I think it's going to be tough to throw on Vanderbilt this year. There's a lot of talent, back there. So if you are going to beat them, it's going to be, through a powerful run game, just due to the questions I have with their front four as well as their linebacker room, potentially two of the weakest position groups in the conference. So I mean, in your starting four, just starting there real quick, I don't see your immediate playmaker. It may be Anais DeCosmos or DeCosmo. So, looking at him, that may be your guy, but outside of him, I don't see anyone really ready to step up in that position. I could be wrong. I could be, maybe someone breaks out that we haven't seen yet in the linebacker room outside of Kane Patterson. It's a tough one to pick. It's a tough one to see who's going to be next to him. So with that in mind, the breakout player I'm going to pick for Vanderbilt's defense is going to be Patterson's partner back there at linebacker, and that would be Langston Patterson. So, a sophomore, played predominantly on special teams and minimally last year. 3-star recruit in the class of 22. 3 tackles in Hawaii was really the only thing that popped off the page, at least when I read it. They went out to Hawaii and beat the brakes off them. In Hawaii too. SEC schools aren't usually the ones making the trip to Power 5 schools, especially Hawaii. That's a journey, but we'll see how they do against Hawaii this year in Nashville. But I think Patterson is going to be due for a big year by virtue of kind of a trial by fire. So, he's presumed to be, a starter in that linebacker room. He's presumed to be able to take that step up. And, from there, the opportunities are going to come. I think Clark Lee is a definitely above average recruiter. I think he's, getting a lot of talented kids interested in Vanderbilt and into the university. So I don't think he missed on this one. I think Patterson's going to have a big day or a big season, and, kind of looking to see how that that Patterson duo in the linebacker room looks like. But definitely have concerns with the defense, really the front four in the linebacker room. But I know Vanderbilt's looking to make some moves and rise as a program. It may not be this year, but have faith if if you are one of the Vanderbilt fans out there. I think it could happen at some point. I think you got the guy to do it in Clark Lee, but there's still that talent issue between your school and the rest of the conference. So, all right, so moving on to 6th place in the SEC East here. This is a team with a lot of buzz around them. This is a team with coming off a tremendous finish in 2022. This is a lot of people picking them as their sleeper team in the East to make some noise and have a big year. I am not high on them. I don't think they can capture that magic again this year, and that is South Carolina. So South Carolina, if you look at what they did, really at the end of the year, beat Tennessee, beat Clemson, lost to Notre Dame, but it was a real back and forth, down to the wire type of game. So there are a lot of people who are remembering those final 3 games as like the South Carolina of today. I think you need to look holistically at everything South Carolina did last year. And at that same time, if you look at South Carolina's schedule, and I'm not doing a game-by-game prediction. I'm just, this is just kind of the average feel. If you look at South Carolina's schedule, and you look at the first 5 games that they play, and in any order, I don't remember specifically what it is, but it's North Carolina in Charlotte. You have your SEC, your FCS Cupcake game. You play Georgia. You play Mississippi State. I think that one's at home. Georgia's on the road. And then you play Tennessee, and I believe that one is on the road too. So you look at that, and that's the end of September there. They could be 4-1. They could be 1-4. And then if that's the case and they're 1-4, is Beamer going to magically resurrect this program? And that's the concern that I have, that their schedule is so front-loaded that it's going to be tough for them to bounce back as the season progresses, especially if it gets off to a rocky start. So with that, Beamer's definitely got his hands full this I don't think anyone really knows what South Carolina is going to be. There are experts saying they're going to win 8-9 games. Vegas has their over under at like 5. Any of the advanced analytics usually are somewhere in the middle. So just question marks everywhere about this South Carolina team. I'm not high on them. I think they end up in 6th, and I still think Beamer is the guy, but this is a down year. It's not going to be because of the offense, though. Obviously Spencer Rattler there. I think Spencer Rattler at his best is one of the better quarterbacks in the conference. When he's at his worst, though, he is rough to watch. Again, I got my Gator gear on. I watched him not even be able to throw a touchdown against the worst Florida defense I've ever seen in my life. And if he can't do that against them, I don't know what he's going to do against Georgia. I don't know what he's going to do against Alabama. I don't know. They don't play Alabama this year, but you know what I mean. Any of the better tiered defenses in this conference. We'll see. He's definitely got the receiving room around him to make this happen. Antoine Wells is your number one, a dynamic receiver there for him. Eddie Lewis is a great slot receiver as well. So I'm not worried about Spencer Rattler's really succeeding. It's really a matter of just stay consistent. Use the room that Beamer has created for you, and from there, I think the results could end up coming as a result of that. The breakout player I've got is going to be from the running back room. I think it's the least proven position in the in this offense, and I don't evaluate offensive line, so I can't tell you what that may be looking like. But that breakout player is going to be Juju McDowell. So touchdowns against Charlotte and Arkansas last year. Charlotte, group of 5 school, nothing to write home about. Arkansas is obviously an SEC foe, and they kind of ended up middle of the pack, high expectations, middle results. But he also, but McDowell also had a 65-yard catch against Clemson in a game that South Carolina desperately needed to win, and that they did win. So I look at McDowell as someone who can be the feature back this year. I think that's what he'll end up becoming. But at that same time, he's someone that can contribute to the passing game, in a multiple style offense that Beamer runs. It'll be interesting to see how that comes together for this offense, knowing that Rattler can just dump it out to the flat if all else fails. On the defensive side of the ball, I think they're definitely weaker on defense than they are on offense. I think they end up with kind of a middle of the road defense just by virtue of returning production. So looking at the front four first off, Jordan, I'm sure I can say this right. Jordan Strachan, kind of your number one guy up there on, alongside Tonka Hemingway. So your two DNs are going to, kind of be that power duo in your front four. It's a D line I think that ends up being middle of the road in the conference, which for South Carolina is probably going to be good enough. I think they're going to be offense first this year. The DBs are very similar. I like Nick Imanwori, so younger guy that made an impact immediately as a freshman. Same with DQ Smith, so two safeties that are young, played as true freshmen, and have stepped up big already. Throw in Marcellus Dial at corner, and you're really cooking with some talented players in the DB room. But again, I think they end up kind of middle of the pack compared to the rest of the conference. The linebacker room is where I have some questions. I think in a conference as loaded as the SEC at linebacker, I don't know where South Carolina is going to step in and end up ahead of these other schools. So with that in mind, I do like I like Debo Williams. I think he's a talented linebacker. But the player I'm going to take as my breakout player for South Carolina is Mohamed Kaba. So this is a guy that unfortunately missed 11 games last year. Went out in the their opener against Georgia State, where he had a pass defended, so plays a little bit more in coverage to help out those DBs. Had he not missed 11 games last year, I don't think I'd pick him as a breakout player. So if Kaba comes back from his injury, returns to decent form, then this linebacker room really has nothing to worry about. Not as much as projected. I don't know how he's going to recover. I don't know how he's going to step back and be a leader on that field again. But I think for the time being, the expectation that he's going to be healthy and he's going to come out there and and be a playmaker. So I'm looking forward to watching Cabo play at linebacker, and I think he's has a big year alongside McDowell at running back for a South Carolina team that I personally think is going to fall short of their expectations, but very well could see that flipping the other way. All right, so moving on, and just to recap, Vanderbilt in 7th place in the East, South Carolina in 6th place in the East. Now moving on to 5th place. So, this is a team that last year definitely really showcased the reality of the state of the program. I think that's the easiest way to say it. Kind of showed kind of the nasty underbelly that has been neglected for years and is now in the process of being fixed. I don't think it gets fixed immediately this year. It's more of a long-term project, and that's going to be my Florida Gators. So I think they end up in 5th. It's we got to give Billy some time. It's going to work out eventually. It's just the state of the program has been trailing, other programs for, at least 5 to 10 years now at this point. Just got caught up on facilities, and then NIL becomes a big thing. So now we're catching up on NIL, and then something else is going to be the big thing that we're always a step behind on. And from here on now, I do think Billy can put it all together. He just needs time. He needs a patient fan base, which is not Florida's strong suit. And ultimately, when his players are in there, when his coaching staff comes together, everything like that, I do think Florida is going to put together some special years under him. 2023 is not going to be one of those special years, but in due time, be patient. So looking at the offense first and foremost, last year it was a very run-heavy offense. I anticipate that being the case again. Looking at Montreal Johnson in particular, who, realistically speaking, could end this year as the best running back in the SEC. He is a workhorse. He is dynamic, and the reality is that I have a hard time on paper finding a running back who's better than Montreal Johnson. So no issues with him there. At quarterback, Anthony Richardson is gone, and now Graham Mertz comes in. A tale of two quarterbacks. Anthony Richardson was one of the most electric and dynamic players I've ever watched in college football. But the issues that we had at quarterback were that Anthony would go out and play lights out one game and then tank dramatically the next week. Graham Mertz, I think when he comes to Florida, I really just think the team is just looking for consistency. I don't see Graham Mertz putting the game on his shoulders and ripping off a 40-yard run. That's not going to happen. But I don't see Graham Mertz losing games for Florida this year. I think I see all these rankings coming out where they have Graham Mertz as the worst or second worst quarterback in the conference. I can confidently put him somewhere in the middle just because he's more of a known entity. He's coming in as a senior. He's coming in with experience, and I think that new change of scenery, new coaches, new receiver, new O-line, all of that together could be great for someone like Mertz. It's been great for other transfers all around the country. Why not Mertz? I think this is the year that he shows up and just does enough. And again, it's going to be frustrating as a viewer when when you're coming from Anthony Richardson running, for 30, 40 yards and Superman diving, um, you know, it's going to be a very, drastic, change to the program. But, that's a Billy guy. If he fits the system and it works, then, then people are going to be, having a different tune at the end of this. The receiver room is the one I'm the most worried about. It's a very young wide receiver room. A lot of the playmakers from last year either got drafted or transferred out. So really, outside of Ricky Pearsall, I don't know who I don't know who your number 2, your number 3, your number 4. Like, it may end up being one of the freshmen they brought in, and I don't have them that high up in the depth chart right now. They'll probably get some playing time, but as of right now, I don't see them starting. But of the starters that I'm looking at, I think your breakout player comes in the form of Marcus Burke. So, he was a 4-star recruit in the class of 21. So, one of the last Mullen guys coming in. Hasn't made a substantial impact yet. The only notable thing on paper was a 14-yard catch against Vanderbilt. But in a more consistent starting role this year, I think Burke can make a difference. He's shown in small pieces what he could be and what he could become as a receiver. And now in an offense that probably fits him more, with a quarterback that can use him more, I look for Burke to have a big year. I look for him to step up for this Florida receiver room and make a difference and establish himself, especially going into next year. Looking at the defense, I really do like this front three this year, this D-line that they've put together. Cam Jackson comes in as a transfer, and I think he automatically puts this together and becomes a standout. If you look at the players that Napier brought in last year, whether they were true freshmen or whether they were transfers, they almost all of them had an immediate impact. Cam Jackson will fit that mold and be an immediate impact player for this Florida D-line. I think the linebacker room, at least on paper, is probably like a middle of the road, if not a little lower below that. I think there's still talent out there. Shamar James, I think is pegged for a big year. They bring in Taraji Mitchell, who I think is also one of those contributors. Prince Umenmielen, so I think as a whole, they have playmakers, in these positions. I'm just curious how it stacks up to the rest of the conference. And the DB room is the one I have the most questions about, just by virtue of how young this DB room is. And really, outside of Kamari Wilson, I'm having a hard time pinning who that number 2 playmaker is. And Kamari's only only a sophomore. So if you're leaning on him for everything as a as a unit, that is tough. It's tough to put all that pressure on a sophomore. But eventually, and there's all these backups, all these younger kids waiting in the wings. So again, it's a team that's going to grow. It's a very young team collectively, especially on this defense. There's only 3 seniors. So if you're looking at the future for Florida should be bright, but 2023 may not. But from a breakout perspective, my breakout player is coming from the secondary, and it's going to be Jalen Kimber. So really notable plays of last year was a pick 6 against USF, a game that was way too close for comfort. Picked up a couple tackles against Mizzou and a couple against Texas A&M. So, just showing those glimpses of what he could be, and watching that go a long way this year, as that starter alongside Jason Marshall on the other corner. So from there, putting that together and developing into a full-time starter is going to be huge for him. Kimber's got a lot of potential. He's got a lot of talent, and I think if he's ready to step up and be that full-time starter, like Napier thinks he is, he's going to live up to those expectations. So look at Kimber on defense, look at Burke on offense as the breakout players for a Florida Gator team that, I think unfortunately hovers around that 500 mark over the course of this year. So, and with that in mind, just stepping in real quick, because I never, did this like I did in the last few videos. I think you could switch Vandy and South Carolina. And I think these, Florida and the team we're about to talk about, I think you could flip-flop them too, and I would understand. So with that in mind, moving on. So 7th place in the East was Vanderbilt, 6th was South Carolina, 5th was Florida. 4th is a team that, is always in like that middle of the road spot for the last few years at least. I don't know what the program expectations for this coach are, whether it's to take a step up or just not take a step back. And, I don't think anyone outside of their program knows the answer to it. I think if you don't know by now, it is Mizzou. So Eli Drinkwitz is in year 4. He's been like at or around 500 every single year that he's coached there. I don't see much of a difference this year. I think it's going to be a lot more of the same. He's in a tough conference. He's in a tough division, and it's tough to make those next steps. And if Mizzou is looking to make those next steps, I think this is the year where they figure out if Drinkwitz is the guy or if he's not. So looking at offense real quick. I do think they have a pretty good running back room with Cody Schrader at the lead there. Again, like just being pedestrian enough to keep the ball moving. It's going to go a long way for this team, and being pro tempo and being more kind of keep the ball moving and getting the snap off quick. Having a good running back goes a long way, and I don't think he's top 5 in the conference, but I think you can make an argument for it. When it's all said and done, he may bend up as one of the top 5 in the conference. I think Brady Cook is a decent enough QB where kind of that same deal. If he's not gonna put the game on his back, but he's not gonna throw it away either. So kind of good enough for Mizzou. Good enough to win them the games that they need to, but not good enough to win them the games that they shouldn't. The receiver room is where I've got some questions. Obviously, Luther Burden, came in last year as a true freshman and lit it up. They bring in Theo Weiss from Oklahoma, so they have a few guys that are definitely playmakers here. But outside of that, it's not a very deep room compared to the rest of the conference. So with that, I think my breakout player for Mizzou is going to be at the tight end position. It'll be Tyler Stevens. So 1 touchdown last year, but it was against Georgia. So, good team to score against. They're no slouch, obviously. Had a 28-yard catch against Louisiana Tech, so, got a little bit of a big play under his belt. I know it's Louisiana Tech, and it's not the best in the world. But, again, if they're on the schedule, you got to beat them. And, Stevens kind of showed that, he can perform against them. So I think in a more consistently starting role and a more consistently present role that, Stevens has a bigger year, he has a bigger opportunity, and he adds to an offense that, I think defenses are going to be preoccupied by others. And it's going to leave him in one-on-one, or it's going to leave him open because no one's really thinking about him. So I think Stevens has a big year for Mizzou on an offense that is kind of middle of the road across the board. The defense, on the other hand, I think is going to be tough this year. I don't think they're going to give up a lot of points, especially through the air. One of the better DB rooms in the conference. Jalen I'm guessing it's Carlisle, is a phenomenal safety back there. Joseph Charleston is another one to pick, to latch on to. Chris Abrams-Drain, they have a lot of talent in the DB room. I would argue it's one of the best in the conference. So don't anticipate throwing for 300 on this team because I think the odds of that happening are very, very low. Same with the linebacker room. I think you can probably say that they're a top 5 linebacker room in the conference. Tyron Hopper is, he's a man on a mission out there. Chad Bailey is the same. So, not worried about them defensively, at least in the the secondary in the linebacker room. The front four is like a little bit of a drop off, but I mean it ends up probably being middle of the conference when you look at the talent there. You have Darius Robinson as your as a fifth year senior there, grad student. So you have talent present. It's a very experienced defense this year. So again, looking at the Drinkowitz problem is what happens when all these guys leave this year. Who's taking their spots? So something to consider, but not for 2023. And with that, the breakout player that I have for Mizzou's defense is going to be on that D line, and it's going to be Jaden Jernigan. So again, very more playing time than what Stevens has gotten in the past. But as a D lineman, really last year, sack against Louisiana Tech, pass defended against Wake Forest, and I believe that spans basically the whole season, with Louisiana Tech being, if not the first game they played, then the second, and then the Wake Forest game is their bowl game. So consistently present over the course of the season, and especially as a senior, he's gonna want to go out leaving his mark on the program. So I would expect him to step up. I would expect him to take the initiative this year on a seasoned D line that that knows what's expected of them, that knows what it takes to win in the SEC, and I expect him to be a pretty consistent contributor. So I would look for Jernigan on defense and Stevens on offense to be your breakout players for a Mizzou team that may have a lot of questions at the end of this year, and it's really more so where do we go from here? Because right now they're going to be consistently average. All right, moving on into recap. Vanderbilt 6th in the East, Vanderbilt 7th in the East, South Carolina 6th, Florida 5th, Mizzou in 4th. So that leaves us with our final 3, and I think these next 2 are pretty interchangeable. If you want to put 1 at 2 and 1 at 3, I would understand. But in 3rd place, I'm going to go with a team that made a pretty significant leap last year, a team that really rose to the occasion and had their best season in, 15 years. And you all know who it is by now. That's going to be Tennessee. So obviously Josh Heupel has figured out something in Knoxville. As much as I want to see them suffer, as much as I want to see them lose, he has put together the formula for success for right now. He's got a phenomenal offense that fires on all cylinders, and the draft results show that with how many guys going off to the NFL. So looking at the speaking of the offense, let's take a dive into that. So funny enough, knowing that Heupel's offense is chuck it and score 40 plus points a game. I actually look at the running back room as the best one coming back this year. Jalen Wright, I think, is a top 5 back in the conference, and if Heupel pivots and kind of uses Wright, knowing the strength that he has in that position, it could catch people off guard. I think they're going to expect a million miles in the air, and if they were to turn more to the run game this year, it could be interesting and it could work for them. So, but outside of that, looking at the receiving room this year, obviously you got guys like Ramel Keaton and Brew McCoy coming back. So big advantage there, knowing that you still have that depth when you had at least how many went off to the NFL? I know at least 2 did, Hyatt and Tillman, but it's it's attractive to recruits. If you're a wide receiver, this is a room you want to be a part of. So there's still a lot of talent there. It's definitely in an older, more experienced room. So again, we look at 24. What are they going to do at wide receiver with all these guys gone? And we'll see how it comes together. But my breakout player is going to be at the QB room. And right now the presumed starter is going to be Joe Milton. So I'm going to lean that way and pick Joe Milton to have a breakout year. And looking at what he's done in the past personally, he's done nothing to impress up until the Orange Bowl, basically. So, I think people are banking on the idea that he's going to have an Orange Bowl performance for 12 games a year. I don't even think they need that. They just can't have the Joe Milton that I saw, overthrowing receivers by 10 yards on every play. So if they get Orange Bowl Joe Milton, and I don't think they're going to get that, but I think they're going to get something close to it. This Tennessee team could be pretty scary. So, and speaking of which, that performance in the Orange Bowl, 251 yards and 3 touchdowns against Clemson, just lit up a very talented defense. So, if he can do that against Clemson, he can do it against anyone. He's a runner. The notable stat that I have is a 21-yard run against Ball State last year, and I know Ball State is nothing, but at least for Tennessee, then they should be nothing. But he's a guy that can run. He's a guy that can throw. Hypo will build the QB room around him, and they'll figure out how it's going to work. But I expect a big year from Milton. I expect him to be competitive. Right now, I don't have him. I have him kind of like as a middle of the road QB in this conference, but in the right offense with the right people, he could rise to the occasion big time. Look at Milton as your breakout player on Tennessee's offense. On the defense, I think they have a very talented, very experienced defense. They only have one starter who's not a senior. Again, like looking at this Tennessee team for 24, like what are they going to do when all these guys leave? So that's not a question for today. That's a question Hypo has to answer in January of 2024. But looking at this defense, very nice linebacker room. Aaron Beasley and Keenan Peely are a dynamic 1-2 punch. The DB room reflects that as well. Great safeties. Jalen Mikolo. I probably said that wrong, but that's all right. Tamarian McDonald in the star. Kamal Hayden. I mean, just go to pick your poison here. Wesley Walker, Danico Slaughter, like just loaded with talent back there. So, I think this is a Tennessee defense that obviously struggled last year, but comes back with a lot of experience under their belt and should be taking a pretty significant step up this year. The D line for Tennessee, I think, is still probably a top 5 when you look at the returning production there. I like Tyler Barron. I like Roman Harrison. So, it's tough to pick a breakout player because presumably everyone is broken out in some capacity. But the player I'm going to pick is the only player who's not a senior on this defense, and that's going to be Bryson Eason. So, looking at what he's done in the past, totaled 1.5 sacks last year, one full one against Akron and a half against LSU. Akron is nothing. And then half a sack against LSU means he's getting in the backfield. I don't know who the other half was with, but it shows he can create that pressure alongside a teammate, which is huge. Picked up a couple tackles against UT Martin and Vanderbilt. So UT Martin, FCS school, no big deal. Vanderbilt, while better than normal last year, is still Vanderbilt. So, I like. Nothing that screams amazing so far, but I imagine in a more consistent starting role, in a more, and with a seasoned defense around him, but everyone's, putting in their last efforts on, that Eason will break out. He'll be alongside talented D linemen, talented linebackers that are going to be putting pressure on these O-line with him. And, I expect him to follow suit and contribute just the same. So, I look at Eason on defense, and I look at Milton on offense as breakout players for a Tennessee team that, is going to be right in the thick of it to the last few weeks of the season. They're definitely going to be, it's going to be another good year in Knoxville, as much as I hate that. All right, so, recapping the East, 7th is Vanderbilt, 6th is South Carolina, 5th is Florida, 4th is Mizzou, and 3rd is Tennessee. So wrapping up with these final two, your options are the defending national champions and Kentucky. So I'm not gonna leave you in suspense. Georgia's winning the East. I'm not gonna play games this time around. There's still a pretty seismic talent gap between Georgia and everyone else. But before I get to Georgia, let me go with Kentucky real quick. Disappointing last year. Obviously the expectations were pretty high. They were in the top 10 at one point, finished just above 500 with a pretty bad bowl loss at the end of the year. But if I look at Stoops has been there a while. He's the winningest coach in school history. I don't know if he's going to be there long. If that Iowa job opens up soon, maybe he finds his way back to Iowa City, back home. But for the time being, he is the Wildcats head coach. He's the best they've ever had, and they had Bear Bryant. So really shows the dedication and the progress he's made with this program. And I expect them to take another step in the correct direction this year. So looking at the offense, I think Devin Leary is a great transfer option. I know he's coming in injured, but if he comes back to full health for Kentucky, they're going to have one of the best quarterbacks in the conference. So, we're going to see what type of Devin Leary we get. Do we get post-injury, sluggish and scared Devin Leary? Do we get return to form and chip on his shoulder Devin Leary? I think we get something closer to that. And, as a result of that, Tennessee or Kentucky ends up with, some of the better quarterback play in the conference. They have the receiver room to aid in that. It's a pro-style offense, so they're putting 5 wide out there like it's nothing. Dane Key is a strong receiver out there, as is Berrien Brown, and they're sophomores. This is an impressively, it's a young room where everyone works together. So again, Kentucky is building something special, and if Stoops stays around, assuming that the Iowa job doesn't open up, Kentucky could end up in this, quote unquote power position, or as one of the better teams in the SEC for the foreseeable future. And then looking at the running back room, I think Ray Davis is a good running back in his own right. But with that in mind, I'm actually going to pick someone from that running back room outside of Ray Davis, because Kentucky is one of the few SEC schools that still uses a fullback. So with that in mind, I would expect a big year out of Justice Dingle, the fullback there. So actually moved from linebacker to fullback last year, and is used more in like a blocking capacity. Not really a runner, but had a 10-yard catch against Youngstown State, which is your FCS game, so no big deal. And the way I look at it is, if Dingle is used more in short yardage packages, those 3rd and 1s, 4th and goals, he can make a pretty significant impact. If he's just someone you can hand the ball off to and he bulldozes his way to the first down marker or to the end zone, it gives Kentucky another option, and that's really all you can ask for your offense, especially in a game where the fullback is being phased out. I'm very interested to see how Stoops uses him this year, knowing that he's probably going to be running a very pass-heavy offense. So I look at Dingle as your breakout player on offense for Kentucky. Looking at the defense, this is where I think things take a step back. So, just starting at the DBs and moving forward, I think you got a middle-of-the-road DB room. There is talent there, don't get me wrong. There is Zion Childress. There's Jordan Lovett. Andrew Phillips. So you have guys back there that can make plays. You have guys that back there that can contribute. But I don't think they're to the level that the rest of the conference is. I don't think. I think really, the DB room and the linebacker room are not going to be the reason Kentucky loses games. It's going to be the front three, but the linebacker room, to your point, or to to the point of Kentucky there, definitely some talent there. De'Aric Jackson at linebacker, Trevin Wallace, J.J. Weaver. So, and they're running 3-4, so there's definitely it's an experienced room back there, regardless of what year they're at. The D line is very young. Deion Walker is a sophomore and really broke out as a true freshman. But outside of him, I look around and I'm like, even if they had seniors or freshmen out there, I don't see where the production is going to come from. But with that in mind, the player I have breaking out is going to be Khalil Saunders. So 3-star in the class of 21, half a sack against Youngstown State has been the only notable stat line for him. And I think he's going to break out really by virtue of necessity. So it's a D-line where, outside of Walker, who's probably going to be getting double-teamed every single play, someone needs to take the mantle then, and someone needs to, beat a guard or beat a tackle in in one-on-one coverage and get to the running back and get to the quarterback. I think Saunders has the ability to. We just haven't seen it. It's been more in special teams arena. So I look to Saunders to step up. I look to him to carry that mantle for Kentucky and make a splash on this defense, knowing how badly it's needed in the front three. So I look at Saunders on defense and Dingle on offense to be your breakout players for a Kentucky team that bounces back to form in a pretty big way this year. And then moving on to Georgia, this is no surprise that they're going to win the division here. Defending national champions 2 times in a row. Kirby wants to make it 3, obviously. He's built something incredibly special up there in Athens, and I don't see it slowing down anytime soon. If you look at the start off with the receiver room, obviously the guys they have returning, Brock Bowers, Ladd McConkey are borderline superheroes, especially Brock Bowers. That guy, easily the best tight end in the country. Ladd McConkey's made more than his fair share of plays at the position. It's a top 5 wide receiver room, no questions asked. And I think it's while you do think of Georgia as kind of a run heavy offense historically, the weapons are there for them to just throw it out every play. Speaking of the receiver room, I think Kendall Milton is middle of the road. I think he's someone who is going to continue to contribute, but with the idea that there's much more firepower in the receiver room, I don't think his contributions are necessarily quote unquote needed. They're not going to rely on him as much as they have on their running backs in the past. So maybe the numbers won't tell that story, but he's very talented in his own right. I think he just ends up as a middle-of-the-road running back this year by virtue of I don't necessarily think they need him to be the greatest running back in Georgia history. But a breakout player, obviously, when you lose a 2-time national championship winning quarterback, you need someone to replace him, and Carson Beck is your guy. He's going to break out this year. Very limited stat line so far. Very hard to tell what type of quarterback he's going to be. All we've really seen was 2 touchdowns against Vanderbilt, a 20-yard run against South Carolina, so dual threat. Interesting to see how he carries the mantle for this program now that he's the leader there. I think he's probably a more traditionally skilled quarterback than Stetson was. Stetson was the guy that had to grind and fight his way through the depth chart. Beck is your highly touted, highly recruited, guy that had offers from everywhere. So definitely a change of balance at the position. interesting to see how he performs, but again, the pieces are there to the point where, you can pick a dude from, you can take a 1-star from a local high school and put him around this Georgia team, and he'd do enough to get him a win. So I expect Beck to have a pretty big year. I don't know where he's going to end up in the conference. He's probably one of the least proven right now, so it's hard to assess. But I expect Beck to have a pretty big year for Georgia on their path to, on their quest for a three-peat. So, and looking at the defense here, obviously Georgia's defense is no joke year in and year out. The concern, in a sense, is that every year they send 10 guys to the NFL, and they got to replace 10 spots on this defense. Or it's probably not that. It's probably like 7. So the DB room, I think, is the one that's most intact. You have Malachi Starks, Tyke Smith. So there's talent back there. Javon Bullard, Kamari Lassiter. So I'm not worried too much about the DB room. It's really the front. The front 6 there, the D line, and then the front 7, the D line, and then the linebacker room, just because it is a little less formally proven. On the D line, you have Nazir Stackhouse, that senior leader up there. Outside of him, I don't know who your number 2 guy is. I think you can make an argument for some, but Stackhouse is the only 100% proven guy on that D line. The linebacker room, a little different. You have I know it's not Hamon, because that would be ham in French. Is it Jamon? Jamon? Oh no, it might. He's got a French last name. Hamon Dumas Johnson. Obviously someone that's made an impact in the past. Smile Mondin, as well. So talented guys back there in that position group. But, looking to find who that breakout player is. I think it does come from that linebacker room, and it comes in the form of Jalen Walker. So played in the national championship game, had a sack and a pass defended against TCU. Picked up a couple tackles against Vanderbilt. So, yeah, and that was as a true freshman. So I think he's going to, accelerate his game this year, be another piece to this Georgia linebacker puzzle where they keep churning out talent year after year. I think Walker is that next guy, and he puts the pieces together this year to make that happen. So, Walker, by virtue of being one of the youngest guys on this defense, and this defense continuously being one of the best in the country, makes a big wave this year alongside Beck at quarterback for a Georgia team that wins the East with very little resistance, unfortunately. All right, so now moving on to the SEC West. The team I've got in 7th here, it's a team with a first-year head coach, which narrows it down to a few. Team that ended last year on a not so fortunate note. Their first-year head coach is not due to anything that the previous head coach did wrong. It was due to the passing of Mike Leach. So this is obviously going to be Mississippi State. I think they take a step back this year. I'm not saying the program is in turmoil, but I think there's a lot of unknowns, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I'm curious how Zach Arnett, handles things. I think the actual program did the correct move by promoting him instead of trying to find a replacement, and just trying to keep someone familiar with Mississippi State, knowing that Mike Leach is no longer head coach, and it wasn't due to a choice. So looking at the offense real quick, I think Will Rogers is the best quarterback in the SEC. I don't know if that's a controversial take or not, but this guy can throw it any and everywhere that you see it. He's got a good running back there with Jaquavius Marks. So Whatever they end up running with Arnett in year one, it's going to be probably something pro style. They got the quarterback to do it. They got the running back to do it. Now I got to look at the wide receiver room, which outside of Jaden Wally, I'm a little I've got some questions about. I think maybe and I apologize for butchering this name here. Lydiatric Griffin there. So outside of those two, I'm looking for someone to step up. And I do think it's going to come in the form of a tight end transfer. And again, apologies if I destroy your name here. Jerquarius Spivey. So comes in from TCU, has played in the national championship game. Went through that amazing season out there, but is looking for a new opportunity in Starkville. Picked up his only touchdown of the year against Iowa State. And I know that was an Iowa State team that struggled, but has seen action against Power 5 conference opponents. So I expect Spivey to make a jump this year in an offense that's favorable for him. I don't know if Will Rogers is as good as Max Duggan. That's a pretty big stretch, but he's in this. He's probably in the ballpark. He's probably comparable in terms of what he can do at the position. So knowing that Spivey will get more of a permanent starting role is going to boost his morale, put him in a spot to succeed. And he could be a pretty dynamic weapon for this Mississippi State offense. So now looking at the defense, this is where I think some things take a little bit of a step back this year. There's just too many question marks for my liking. The questions are not in the linebacker room. Let's make that one clear. Nathaniel Watson and Jet Johnson are a phenomenal duo. So I am not worried about them there. I think they've got plenty of talent in the linebacker room. The D-line is where my questions start. I think this is going to be a below-average D-line because outside of Jaden Crumetti, I have a hard time seeing who your leader or your playmaker is out there. The DB room is very similar because outside of Sean Preston and DeCamarion Richardson, I have a hard time seeing who your playmaker is. It's the same deal. With that in mind, I'm going to pick someone from the DB room as my breakout player, and this is going to be Marcus Banks. So one of your many seniors on this defense, has made a name for himself in a capacity. Passes defended against Arizona and Alabama. So Arizona is, okay, that's a it's a good stat line number. They're kind of retooling, but getting up there and getting up there against Bryce Young and batting down one of his passes. I don't know what receiver it was on, but that's a pretty big move. It shows he can play at the level that Mississippi State needs from him. 2 tackles against Memphis, and I know that's a Group of 5 school, but it's definitely towards the top of the Group of 5 historically. So shown that in the limited playing time and the limited capacity that he's been allotted, that he can step up to the occasion. Now that he's going to be more of a consistent starter in the safety role, I do anticipate him to take that next step. So I look for Banks to have a big year, to be one of those leaders in the DB room, to help elevate the room, to help elevate the defense as a whole, elevate the program alongside Spivey there at tight end. Now moving on to 6th in the SEC West. Talked about one team with a first-year head coach. We're going to talk about another team with a first-year head coach, and this was due to the catastrophe that was Brian Harsin, and him doing everything wrong imaginable at Auburn this year or last year. So Hugh Freeze is in. I think Auburn. It's going to be an interesting. Hugh Freeze is an excellent coach. I'm not going to pretend that he's not. But with that in mind, I think it's going to take a little bit of time to get him back to where Auburn historically is. I do think you could potentially switch them with the team I have coming up next. I think they're in roughly the same tier at this point. but I think Hugh Freeze has a successful enough year one to set precedents for the future that Auburn is a work in progress. Starting with the offense, I do think there's quite a few, and yeah, to clarify, Freeze brought in guys from all around the country. Half this offense is from the transfer portal. It looks like half the defense is too. I don't remember where all of them come from, transparently, but looking at the offense, I like the addition of Peyton Thorne from Michigan State. I think he was a coveted quarterback coming out of the Michigan State exodus, and I think he's going to do very well at Auburn. I have him as a top 5 quarterback in the conference right now. That doesn't compare to the wide receiver room, which I think is even stronger. Shane Hooks, Jair Shorter in particular, are day one playmakers and ready to light the world on fire. I think your weakest room on offense is going to be the running back room, just by virtue of we haven't seen this running back room light up the world, especially with Tank Bigsby not there anymore. But with that in mind, I think your breakout player is going to be Jarquez Hunter. So, a guy who's going to be the consistent starter this year. Had a monster game against Mercer last year. 3 touchdowns against Mercer last year. And I know Mercer is FCS, but think of it this way: like those are numbers you expect from any D1 starter against an FCS school. So I think that's pretty substantial that he was able to get those 3 touchdowns, and it's an indicator of what the season is going to look like from here on out. Was able to make a huge play against Georgia as a pass catcher, 62-yard touchdown catch. So he can run it in, and I imagine those 3 touchdowns. I don't have the yardage in front of me; it must not be that high. It's probably more goal line cleanup time, but if he can lower his head and run tough through an SEC roster, if he can add to the playmaking abilities of Thorne at quarterback, then Hunter's in for a huge year at running back. On defense, I think it's kind of the same deal. It kind of mirror each other. I think the defense is going to be a little bit worse than the offense. The D line is impressive. I think this is one of the best in the conference right now. I think you bring in talented guys like Mosiah Nasili-Kite, Justin Rogers, and Marcus Harris. Those 3 make up an incredibly talented and deep defensive line immediately. The linebacker room, I think, is going to end up being middle of the road for the conference. And again, like the linebacker room in the SEC is talented from top to bottom. But in this case, Larry Nixon, Jalen McLeod, there's talent out there in this defense, and they're running all sorts of styles. They're running they run multiple types of defense, multiple styles of defense. So you're going to see all these guys over the course of the season in some capacity or another. The DB room right now, I think, is the weakest. And I don't think it's because there's any one glaring issue. You have Keontae Scott back there who can get the job done. Zion Puckett can as well. I think the breakout player is someone who's broken out already to a capacity, and that would be Jalen Simpson. So someone who's stuck with the program. Jarquez Hunter has as well. Funny enough, they bring in all these transfers, and the guys I picked to break out are guys who stayed loyal to Auburn. So interception and 3 passes defended against Western Kentucky, 5 tackles against Alabama. So breaking that first part down, I know Western Kentucky is group of 5 school, but that's a big day. It's something to recognize, especially at the beginning of the season when Auburn is going to be figuring some things out and making sure these guys gel together. Knowing that Simpson can step up against whatever type of opponent they're going to have, that's a pretty big deal. 5 tackles against Alabama. Again, Alabama is one of the premier programs in all of college football. So if he's out there left and right tackling all across the field, it means he's making big plays when needed. So if you can get back in coverage against anyone, if you can step up and make those tackles, Simpson will have a big year for Auburn as they start to put the pieces together, and Hunter on offense as well. All right, so moving on. Mississippi State in 7th in the West, Auburn in 6th in the West. So now moving on to 5th, a team that I think fell short of expectations last year. I don't know necessarily what their expectations are this year. They're kind of all over the place. But with that in mind, I think 5th place is going to go to Arkansas. So again, an Arkansas team that I think at one point was in the top 10. And, from there, just, pieces kind of fell off a little bit. It's tough to determine what the expectation is for this team this year, because there is a lot of talent on there. I'm not going to pretend that there isn't. This offense is electric. It's just going to be interesting to see how this all comes together and if they can build upon last year's kind of disappointment and, find a way to, to get up into, 8, 9, or 10 wins. The offense, as I said, Raheem Sanders is an amazing running back. KJ Jefferson comes back as a dynamic playmaker at quarterback, so not worried about them. And then the receiver room as a whole is really anchored by Andrew Armstrong. I think, as a whole, this is a wide receiver room that probably is top 5 in the conference. And it really is anchored just due to the performance of one person, independently. Like, Armstrong is talented enough to make them a top 5 room. With that in mind, I think if you're looking at who your breakout player is on offense, it does come from the receiver room, and it's going to come from someone who's never taken a snap of Arkansas football, and that would be Isaac Taslaw. JUCO transfer, someone in that I have very little information on. I don't watch JUCO football. You don't watch JUCO football. That is thunder and lightning. I know you can hear that. So I gotta wrap this up soon. But I look at it as if Sam Pittman, trust him to start as a wide receiver on this team immediately, it means he can live up to those expectations. I don't think Sam Pittman misses too much from identifying talent at the recruiting level. He's really built back Arkansas in a way that they were not at this level under Chad Morris. I promise you that much. So I think Pittman's got an eye for talent. Taslaw fits that description, and it's going to be interesting to see how he steps up, in the wide receiver room this year. And looking at the defense, D-line, I think is going to be upper half in this conference. You definitely got playmakers, Trajan Jeffcoat, Cameron Ball. So not worried about them up front, and I'm not worried about the linebacker room. Antonio Greer and Chris Paul Jr. are, it's a nice 1-2 punch. So not worried about those two, especially not with Pittman. I know he knows how to build a defense, so I'm not worried about them. The DB room, I think, has a little bit of growth and a little bit of wiggle room that they can develop from. They do have some great players, and I'm probably going to butcher your first name here. Alfahim, Walcott, Hudson Clark, Dwight McLaughlin. So I'm not worried about most of them back there, but I do have to pick someone as a breakout player, and I am going to pick someone in the DB room. It's going to be another transfer, but from much larger program, Jaheim Singletary. So four-star recruit in the class of 22, coming in from Georgia. I believe redshirted or just played special teams last year. Very little stat line info. Obviously with Pittman, being a coach at Georgia, coming in and making that impact immediately is going to go a long way. Building that relationship. So, interesting to see how Singletary, steps up for this Arkansas defense. It, ends up as a contributor in this DB room, and showcases the talents that Georgia saw in him, alongside the rest of this defense. So look at Singletary on defense. Look at Slaw on offense for Arkansas to break out this year. All right, moving on. So Mississippi State in 7th, Auburn in 6th, Arkansas in 5th. Moving on to 4th place here. A team that definitely disappointed last year, a team that was preseason top 10 and didn't end up making it to a bowl game. That gives it away. A team with a coach on the hot seat if he doesn't get things back to normal soon, and that's going to be Texas A&M. So if we look at Texas A&M, obviously a hyper talented roster from top to bottom, but a team that just could not deliver. At the end of it, there's no way around it. The offense this year, I've definitely got some questions about. It's a very young offense from top to bottom, so it's hard to evaluate where they are on this, where they are in terms of talent. The receiver room, you got Anais Smith back, who I expected him to go to the league, so the fact that he's back is huge for Texas A&M. You have a budding star in Evan Stewart, so if it all comes together, your receiver room, at least right now in my eyes, it's not up to speed yet. Right now I have them as kind of lower middle in the conference, but it could easily end up as better than that. With all these with everyone coming back. Connor Wegman at quarterback is interesting. As a true freshman, battled 2 other QBs for that starting role. Didn't really get it until the end of the season, so it's hard to evaluate how he is under a full season. So, going to be interesting to see how he does there. The running back room is very raw right now. It's very open at this point. Obviously, and I don't have his name in front of me. Devon Akane off to the NFL, and they need someone to fill that role. So in this case, I'm going to go with the true freshman. I'm going to go with Ruben Owens as your breakout player for Texas A&M offense. 5-star recruit in 2023. I think he was a top 20 recruit in the class of 23. One of the best running backs available, and Texas A&M went out and snagged him. Obviously the success that that the running backs had last year for A&M is a reflection of what Owens could have this year for A&M. So if he lives up to that hype, starts immediately and puts it together, Owens could be the next great Texas A&M running back. It's going to be hard to do that in year one, but I think the pieces are there for him to establish those signs early and put it together over the course of a long and fruitful career. The defense I have no problem with. This is talent upon talent upon talent upon talent. They have the best DB room in the conference. I don't think that's controversial. Damani Richardson is one of the best safeties in the SEC. Jordan Gilbert is another fantastic safety back there. Tyreek Chappell and Tony Grimes in the corners. There's no doubt in my mind that anyone's going to have a hard time scoring on this defense from top to bottom. The D-line is no exception. It's basically all of that. A lot of that class of 22 is finally coming out and getting these roles. McKinley Jackson is there. Shamar Turner is still there, and those are your seasoned leaders on the D-line there. The linebacker room, I think, is the only one that isn't top 5 in the conference, and I think they're probably pretty close to it. And from there, I guess your breakout player by virtue of elimination ends up becoming Edgar and Cooper. So, guy who's already made a name for himself, over the course of last season, 2 passes defended against Miami and a forced fumble against LSU. So 2 Power 5 opponents that Texas A&M beat. two Power 5 opponents that Texas A&M plays again this year, and two Power 5 opponents that Cooper can perform against again. So I look for Cooper to have a big year, not just in terms of his team or in the conference. Cooper could break out to end up being one of the better linebackers in the country this year. So if he puts it all together and has another big year, Texas A&M is going to be in good shape. I think they bounce back pretty heavily this year. I have them in fourth. I think you can make an argument that they end up in third. But for the time being, I look at Cooper and I look at Owens as the breakout players for Texas A&M in a pretty substantial bounce back year. All right, down to my final three as it starts pouring outside, and I know you can hear it. Mississippi State in seventh, Auburn in sixth, Arkansas in fifth, Texas A&M in fourth. Moving on to third place in the conference, I think this is kind of obvious if you narrow down who's left, who I haven't talked about. It's the only, it's a team that just kind of consistently is on the outside looking in. Not a bad program, but not to the level to catch 1 and 2. This is going to be Ole Miss. So, obviously Lane Kiffin is keeping them relevant. He's keeping them, active and performing and hitting the wins that they need to win, and ultimately building a nice program out there in Oxford. And if you look at the offense, that is not the problem. Their offense fires on all cylinders. Quinshon Judkins, I think, is at the end of the day probably the best running back in the SEC. As a true freshman, ran for over 1,500 yards. This guy is an animal, and I think it's only going to get better in year two with this offense. I think you got a real good receiver room there. I think this is the best receiver room in the conference as well. Trey Harris, Zachary Franklin coming in. I think he's from UTSA, I think is my guess, or UNT, one of those out there. So, it's a deep receiver room. It's a receiver room with a lot of talent. You got Quinshon Judkins as the best running back in the SEC. So that leaves quarterback to break out by process of elimination. And, I think the starter this year for Ole Miss is going to be Jackson Dart. So I think he's going to have a huge year. His game against Vandy was electric, 448 and 3. And I know it's Vandy, but 448 and 3 is 448 and 3, any way you slice it. 116 yards rushing against Tulsa, so the guy's a dual threat QB. It's a spread offense, so they're going to use everyone around him. I think Dart has a big year. I have him just outside the top 5 in this conference. I think he easily gets into the top 5 by the end of the year. And, he may be looking at the rest of the country, as one of the better QBs out there. Time will tell where they ends up, but I think Dart has a big year this year for an Ole Miss team that's going to be lighting the world on fire on offense. The defense is where I think they take a little bit of a step back. It's not going to be substantial. It's just going to be that they're going to be probably a lesser version of last year's Tennessee team, where they're going to have to put up 40-plus points a game. I don't think this defense is detrimental in that way. I just don't think they're I think only one position group is a standout, and that's going to be the DB room. And that one's loaded from top to bottom. Isheem Young, Ladarius Tennyson, DeAndre Prince. You can go down the whole list and be like, that's an impact player, that's an impact player, that's an impact player. So it's easy to pick and choose and just figure out that they're all electric in their own right. The D-line and the linebacker room, at least in my eyes, I think are around the middle mark of the conference. So starting with the D-line, really outside of Isaac Ukwu and Cedric Johnson, I don't know who your next up is, especially in the middle there. That's where I've got some questions. I think the linebacker room is, it's really led by Ashanti Sistrunk. So in terms of picking a breakout player, I'm going to go with the linebacker room, knowing that they're running a 4-2-5. So I'll take the if the Mike is good, I'll take the Will, and that's going to be Kari Coleman. So I think that's your breakout player for Ole Miss on defense. Picked up a couple sacks against Troy and a forced fumble in the Egg Bowl. I know Troy is is Group of 5. I don't think Troy is that bad. It's not it's not Akron. It's not UMass. Troy's pretty decent historically. Egg Bowl is their culturally their biggest game of the year. So making a huge play like that. I know they didn't win it last year, but it's good that he can show up in big environments and in big situations. So I expect Coleman to have a big year. I expect him to be surrounded by talent. It's a very seasoned and experienced defense. And, Coleman is one of the pieces of that. He's one of those seniors. So I expect him to help elevate this linebacker room into the better portion of the conference and, maybe beyond. Who knows what who knows what a good year for Coleman can do for him from a professional standpoint, what doors it may open for him in the NFL. So I look at Coleman on defense, Dart on offense as your breakout players for Ole Miss. So that leaves two. That leaves the historic powerhouse and the defending champ for the division. Does Alabama rise back to the top and take their spot as the top of the West? Does LSU showcase that last year is not a one-off and that Brian Kelly is the man in Baton Rouge and that they're ready to go back to Atlanta? And I think in the SEC West, my second place, I'll give you my winner and by virtue second place. But between Alabama and LSU, I've got the West going to Alabama. Pretty chalk pick there. One of the two of them. I'll just start with LSU first, just to, make sure, just to cover up on them before going into Alabama. Obviously, Brian Kelly came in, made waves immediately, had a great first year. Took him to the SEC championship game, kept him in the playoff hunt for, a good chunk of the year. A couple of bad losses, but an overall very successful year one for LSU. Let's start off with the offense. I think you got a great running back in Noah Cain, top 5 in the conference. I think this guy is elite. The receiver room follows suit. Malik Neighbors, Kyron Lacey. It's a younger room than what we usually see out of LSU, but it's a talented room. It's a room that can put it together. So really looking forward to watching them all play. My breakout player for LSU is someone who's already kind of risen to the stage. I expect him to break out nationally in a huge way this year, and it's going to be Jaden Daniels. So I look at two things in particular. I mean, really, it's the ability to be a dual threat quarterback at a big program and consistently win, which we saw last year he can do. His game against Florida, it did rely on his shoulders. The defense couldn't stop Anthony Richardson, and then Florida couldn't stop Jaden Daniels to save their lives. 349 yards and 3 touchdowns against Florida. It was painful. God damn, it sucked. So again, if he can do that, and I know Florida's defense was horrible last year, but if he can do that consistently against SEC defenses, LSU is going to have a great year. His game against Ole Miss on the ground was another torturing of an opposing fan base. 121 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns against Ole Miss. I mean, that's tough. So I think they plan around what he can do for this offense and how he can put it together. I think they'll just play it week by week and understand the defense, the weaknesses of the opposing defense they're playing. If they need to run the ball more, they should be able to do it at will. If they need to throw it up for 400 yards, they should be able to do it at will. And I think Daniels ends up not just being one of the better quarterbacks in the SEC. I think he emerges potentially as one of the best in the country this year. If we're looking at the defense now, I got very little issues with this defense. The D line is the best in the conference. Ton of talent there. Let me just start with a name I can get. Meki Wingo in the nose tackle spot. This is the name I was reading, but I'm probably going to butcher here. Ovi Oghofo in that Jack, kind of hybrid, linebacker D line spot. So two, dynamic playmakers on that D line that help establish them as the best one in the conference. The linebacker room is just as high up there. Harold Perkins showed up as a true freshman from day one and has been lights out. Omar Spates is right there with him, and the 1-2 punch that LSU has is the best in the SEC. Now, surprisingly, the DB room, the one that LSU is most known for, is the one that I have the most questions about. I think there's a lot of not a lot of returning production. A lot of guys went off to the NFL, and outside of Greg Brooks and Deuce Chestnut, I guess maybe Major Burns. Like, I'm looking at who could be your dude back there. Who can be your who can be your honey badger? Who can be the one back there that's gonna stop everything that comes their way? Who's gonna be Patrick Peterson? Who's going to be that for LSU this year? And the breakout player I have is not getting to that level, but I'm looking to see them evolve as a player, and that would be LaTerrence Welch. So, 4-star player in the class of 22. Really, only notable play was in their bowl game against Purdue. I wouldn't even call it a bowl game. That was a Boilermaker massacre. They just beat the brakes off Purdue. He had a pass defended against them, so from there, this is a guy that Brian Kelly brought on in his first recruiting class. I'm sure he's looking to make a name for himself this year. I believe he's going to be one of the starters in the DBs, probably a cornerback. So expect Welch to have a big year. Expect him to continue progressing. Expect him to be someone that lives up to the LSU expectation. And, even if he needs to rotate out and get that experience over the course of the season, it's going to look good for him going into, 24 and 25. So I expect Welch to have a big year for LSU. I expect Daniels to supernova as a quarterback this year. So the two of them are going to make sure that Alabama that LSU has a great season overall that just can't get over that hump this year. And finally, Alabama. Ultimately, here's what happens with Alabama. Whenever people start to doubt them, whenever they think the dynasty is over, whenever people put Alabama preseason 6 on their poll, that's when Saban pulls out all the stops and goes 15-0. Like, we've seen this story before, so I don't know why people will I don't know how you'd put Alabama outside your top 4 preseason by virtue of it's such a known entity that they step up. You don't have to like them. I don't like half the teams in this conference. I want them to go 0-12, but I know what Saban is capable of year after year. And if you think he's slowing down, last year he signed the number 1 class in college football. He's not done. I promise you that. As much as I want him to be done, as much as we all want him to go away, it's not happening. The talent is there. That's not saying there's not questions. That's not saying there's not concerns about this team. But to write them off and think that they got no chance, that's a big mistake. Just starting off with the offense, I think their best piece is going to be at the running back room, and I don't think Jason McClellan has done enough to prove himself as this this amazing playmaker yet. But I think he's going to be relied on heavily this year, and potentially end up as one of the next great Alabama running backs. That's how it works on these years. The receiver room, which they're throwing a whole bunch at you. It's a multiple pro two back, so they could run 5 wide. They could run 3 out there. It's play by play. Outside of Ja'Cory Brooks, I have some questions. Ja'Cory Brooks is your established number 1 guy, but outside of that, there's definitely a depth issue that I think Saban's going to overcome very quickly. And I think it really all depends on who ends up winning this quarterback battle. I think we're all in agreement that it is not solved yet, that we don't know who it's going to be. I should just put an asterisk next to my breakout player and just give it to the quarterback room, whoever ends up winning. Right now, I have it as Jalen Milroe, so I'll give it to Jalen Milroe. It could be Ty Simpson. It could be who they bring in from Notre Dame, Tyler Buckner. It could be one of those guys. I don't know who specifically. I'm going to go Milroe until I'm told otherwise. And because the limited playing time that he provided us, at least in my eyes, it did enough where this is gonna be an old school Alabama team. This is not gonna be your Bryce Young or Mac Jones or Tua or Jalen. It's not gonna be that. It's not gonna be AJ McCarron. It's gonna be, how far back? I gotta name a not dynamic one. That's a tough one. It's gonna be those offenses that didn't run through the QB. He's going to be a game manager. He's going to be someone that just, hopefully doesn't lose you games. I think that's the expectation, is that, chew up clock, take long drives, run the ball. All of that is how Alabama is going to win this year. And their ability to contrast year over year, going from Bryce Young, former Heisman winner, to now Jalen Milroe, and just adapt the offense around him is going to go. It's going to go for a long way for them. 3 touchdown performance against Texas A&M. I know they squeaked by that one. I got to imagine it wasn't a very prolific passing game because I didn't put down the amount of yards thrown. 77-yard touchdown run against Arkansas. So the guy can run. He can throw to whatever capacity he can. I don't think he's going to throw for 400 yards a game, but if he's throwing for 250 and keeping the ball in your offense's hands, it's going to go a long way to keep Alabama winning. And that's exactly how I think it's going to happen. The defense as well, there are some question marks back here. It's a talented roster that ultimately hasn't come to life yet, but I think I know they will. I know they're going to win the West this year. I think the D-line has some questions. I think outside of Jaheim Otis, I don't know who your guy is. I think the linebacker room is the same. Outside of Deontay Lawson and Dallas Turner, I don't know who your guy is. The DB room is the same. Outside of Malachi Moore and Trey Amos and Kool-Aid, I don't know who your guy is. So there's pieces of a puzzle put together, and Alabama is going to find the rest of those pieces very quickly. It's a lot of the unknown, but I think doubting Saban is a huge mistake, and people are falling for it, and I don't understand it. We know what happens, and we know how Saban puts these teams together. But keep putting him at 6th in your preseason rankings. Keep putting him in 2nd or 3rd in your division. We'll see. And I know I'm coming off like a homer, but for a team I don't particularly like. But I think we're just going to see it all come together this year. And I'll see it in person because I'll be at that. Alabama LSU game. I'll be at that Florida Tennessee game. So I'll be at quite a few SEC venues this year. I'll be at Notre Dame SC too, but that'll be for our independence conference review. So, but looking at the DB room, I think that's where your breakout player comes from. There's a couple to pick from, but I'm going to end up picking Earl Little. So 4-star recruit in the class of 22, redshirted last year, didn't really play. It's either going to be him or Caleb Downs, who I think is going to start as a true freshman. And, when you put it all together, it's, it's a matter of these younger players living up to their ratings and their expectations and why Saban, recruited them there. I think Little is going to take a big step this year as a starter, as a playmaker, as a defensive back. It all comes together in a big way for Alabama this year. I think the defense on paper and the offense on paper have some question marks. I think you answer those quickly. I think you answer them, either week one. I think they play Middle Tennessee, and then Texas. Like, everything's got to be answered by that Texas game, and I think it ends up getting answered sooner rather than later. So I expect a big year from Little. I expect a big year from Milroe as Alabama, takes their their division championship back to Tuscaloosa. Now that leaves an SEC championship game between Kirby and Saban, where we've seen this before. We've seen how this works. So who do I got winning? Do I have the two-time champ coming back to life? Well, they're not the two-time SEC champ. Remember, Bama won the SEC championship game in 2021. Is it the two-time national champion, or is it the old throne taken over again? So with that, I am going to pick Georgia. I think Georgia is loaded. They're going to be one of the best teams in not just the SEC but the country this year. I think it's a pretty chalk pick to pick them to win the SEC. But I think Kirby's building something special there, and in a video in a few weeks we'll talk about how the playoffs look if they're in it, and I use if very loosely, but and then what those playoffs look like for them. But that concludes this episode of the New Year 6 podcast and my Power 5 conference wrap-ups. Tune in next time as I move over to the Group of 5. We cover every team on this on the New Year 6 podcast. So I'm going to start off with the American Conference next time. So thank you all for tuning in, and looking forward to the start of the season soon.